Today we're making thick cut pork chops. We're seasoning with some JDQ sweet rub, our Rock's bourbon brisket rub, and then we're gonna make ourselves a root beer glaze. To begin, I season these thick cut pork chops with a heavy dose of our Rock's bourbon brisket rub, which is an all-purpose rub that provides a unique smoky taste with bourbon barrel smoked black pepper and sea salt. Then I layer on a heavy dose of the JDQ sweet rub, which comes from the lineup that won first place at last year's American Royal and offers a unique smoky sweet barbecue flavor that pairs perfectly with pork. After applying the rubs to the top layer, I flip each pork chop over and apply the same amount of rub on the backside. Again, I'm using a heavy dose of our Rock's bourbon brisket rub, and then finishing it off with another heavy dose of the JDQ sweet rub. Lastly, I roll the edges of the pork chops in the overcast of the seasoning to ensure a coating on all sides and edges. For this recipe, I'm using my Traeger Ironwood 885 set to 225 degrees with the super smoke feature turned on for the first 10 minutes, before cranking it up to 350 for another 30 to 40 minutes. While I cook the pork chops, I make the root beer glaze by pouring in 1 cup of our favorite root beer, adding a half a cup of brown sugar, a half a cup of ketchup, 1 teaspoon of mustard, and 1 tablespoon of our Rock's bourbon barbecue sauce. I bring it all to a boil and then let it simmer, reducing it by about half. After letting the pork chops cook on super smoke for 10 minutes at 225, I crank up the smoker to 350 and let them cook for 30 to 40 minutes until they reach an internal temperature of 135. At that point, I apply the reduced glaze using a nylon brush. I apply a heavy coating of the root beer glaze on top of the pork chops, and then flip them over and apply more glaze on all sides. I run the pork chops for another 10 to 15 minutes until they reach an internal temperature of 145, and then I pull them off and let them rest for about 15 minutes before slicing. To serve, you can start by removing the fat cap on the one side and then slice the pork chops into long strips. If you want, you can certainly allow each person to cut their own pork chop or even dice them up into large cubes. However, I prefer to slice them into long strips because it makes it easier for the kids to eat and still delivers an incredibly juicy and flavor-filled bite every single time. Now I get to jump in for that delicious first bite. Here you can see I couldn't resist an extra dip into the root beer glaze before diving into these deliciously juicy slices. But I'll tell you, that really wasn't enough. I just had to go in for another one, and that one was even better than the first. After diving into that third bite, I knew I had to call it quits, because if I didn't, the family wouldn't have any to eat. These pork chops with the root beer glaze are truly delicious, and they are sure to have you going in for seconds.